So if you haven't turned there already, go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 14. You know, some people, when the heat of adversity kind of shows up in their life, they become hard and they become shriveled in their life. Others flourish, they're bettered by it, and they go out and they actually bless other people around them. Well, in chapter 14, we're actually going to see this crisis, and it actually is an international crisis, one that involves Abraham, Abraham's nephew, Lot. Lot's captured. The crisis actually moves Abram to action to do something, and he becomes very, very helpful during this heated time. He comes through, you might say, shining. In fact, we could probably compare Abram to fine gold right here. Just like gold, when it is heated up and the dross comes to the top and they skim off the dross and it's very shiny, you can see your reflection in it. Well, now Abram now shines forth in this story. Now, before we get into this particular story, I want to highlight a passage of Scripture from 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 7 through 9 in the New Living Translation. Peter says this about trials. He says, "These trials are only to test your faith, to show that it is strong and pure. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold. And your faith is far more precious to God than mere gold. So if your faith remains strong after being tried by fiery trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world." And so just as fire again tests and purifies gold, adversity tests and purifies the believer, purifies us. So here Abram shines forth. And the crisis is this. Remember last week we saw Lot making some really poor choices. And one that he made was that he lifted up his eyes and he chose the best that the world had to offer. He pitched his tent toward Sodom. Well, in this chapter, we're actually going to find out that he actually kind of buys a house inside of Sodom and he resides inside of the city gates now. And so we see him in the city, and it's going to be a story of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Why? Because there's this superpower that kind of comes through and captures the whole area, including Lot and his family. Lot becomes a prisoner of war, a POW. Now, Abram responds to the crisis here. And so our theme today is this: how do growing believers respond in times of crisis? How do growing believers respond in times of crisis? For example, when that daughter that you told not to date that guy, and then they date that guy anyway, and then their grades start to suffer, or even maybe they get pregnant, how do you respond in that moment? Or what if your son squanders his college education, he gets F's, he flunks out, all of that money, just a waste? How do you respond in that moment? Or what if your business partner invested all of your money into the swampland in Florida and lost all of your cash? Well, how do you respond in those moments? These are the kinds of things that will bring out the very best of you, or they will bring out the very worst in you. Do you gloat? Do you say, "You are such an idiot," or do you take a different tact? Well, Abram, we see, actually reacts differently than that. And so we asked this morning, what kind of a friend do you want when you're going through crisis in your life? What kind of friend do you want? Well, Abram is that kind of friend. And then secondly, we want to ask, what kind of friend should you be when other people are going through crisis in their life? And so we're going to see five attributes that people of faith, believers, godly people have in times of crisis. And so we're going to begin reading in verse 1. And bear with me, I'm going to read a lot of hard names to pronounce, and so just be kind. It says in verse 1, "It came to pass in Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, the king of the nations, that they made war with Bera, the king of Sodom, Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, the king of Admah, Shinnemeber, the king of Zoboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and attacked the Rephaim and Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim and Ham, the Emim and Sheva Kiriathaim, and the Horites in the mountain of Seir as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who dwell in Hezazon Tamar. And the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Verse 10, now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. Verse 11, then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, all his goods, and departed from there. And so we see this story here. We see this story unfolding before us. Now, I want to give you our first quality, our first attribute coming out here. So first of all, compassion, if you're taking notes. Compassion is our first attribute. Look again at verse 11. It says, they took all of the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions, and they went their way. They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, or his nephew, who dwelt in Sodom and Gomorrah, and his goods, and departed. And so I just read all of that, but let's go give a little bit of a synopsis of what we just read right here. A little bit of the background. Well, first of all, this is the very first war that is recorded in the Bible. And actually, many historians believe that this is the very first war recorded here. Very first war. The first full description specifically of war in the Bible. And so who does it involve? Well, it involves 4 kings against 5 kings. 4 that kind of form this coalition from the east, headed up by a guy by the name of Chedorlaomer. They're from Mesopotamia, which actually happens to be where Abraham came from. And they came through this area, swept through, and they kind of overthrow these 5 cities and kind of put them in subjection. The 5 cities included Sodom and Gomorrah. And so they put them under tribute, and they taxed these 5 cities for 12 years. Well, it says in our story that on the 13th year, these 5 cities rebelled against the 4 kings, and they weren't going to pay taxes anymore. But the problem is it just did not work. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and his guys, their wrath was stoked, and they went after these 5 cities, plundering, killing, and taking captives again. Well, one of those captives just happened to be Lot, Abram's nephew. Well, Abram, he hears about that, and Abram acts. He springs into action. It says in verse 13 of Genesis 14, then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And so as soon as Abram heard about the plight of what had happened of his nephew, Lot, Abram, he acted. He sprung into action, which is very interesting, because if you remember last week, if you weren't here last week, go back and listen to it, or maybe you know this story very well. There was strife between Abram and Lot's herdsmen, and Abram basically said, hey, we've got this strife going on. We're family. Let's not quarrel in this situation. Lot, you choose whatever you want to choose. You choose the best. And by the way, Lot chose the best. Anyway, and they departed company and they separated. Well, at that moment, it might have been very easy for Abram, and hearing the news about Lot, to say something kind of like this. Well, isn't that interesting? He made his bed, let him lie in it, kind of thing. Serves him right. Serves him right. He pitched his tent toward Sodom, and I even heard he bought a house in Sodom. No, that's not what his first response is. His first response is compassion. It's compassion. He cared. He was concerned about his nephew, which, by the way, is an unusual perspective in the ancient world. An unusual perspective in the ancient world. Ancient history would tell us that compassion and grace and mercy weren't really very highly regarded in the ancient world. One philosopher, Roman philosopher, said, mercy is a disease of the soul and the ultimate sign of weakness. And actually, when you read ancient literature, it's just filled with revenge and cruelty. Not compassion, not rescue, not like that. But here, Abram's touched, and he's compassionate, and he cares, and he moves, and he springs into action. He does something. Now, you might think, well, that's all changed today. I mean, we live in a culture that's very compassionate and very gracious and very merciful today. Not necessarily so. Now, not so much like Leander's in a fight with Cedar Park and we go out and pillage and, do our thing. Nothing like that, for sure. But, when people get canceled, Twitter just pounds them into dust until they're hopefully gone forever, according to their perspective, And so, if Abram had that kind of mentality, Lot would have been a goner. And so we see that the godly, the believer, they are different in times of crisis. When there's war, when there's famine, when there's crisis, who acts first? Well, generally speaking, Christians act first. Now, people in the world might have compassion that wells up inside, but historically it has been shown that when food or medicine or immediate response is necessary in a certain situation, it's believers or nations that are actually influenced by Christians that actually respond first. They're the ones that spring into action first with compassion. Now, we actually see this throughout the Bible. In the Old Testament, we see a character by the name of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was in captivity in the Babylonian area, and much of his people had gone back into the land of Israel and to Jerusalem. They were trying to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Well, Nehemiah heard about the plight of the people, that it was not going well. They were being attacked and they were suffering. Well, do you know what Nehemiah's response was? First of all, he wept. And then he acted. He sprung into action. Or think about Jeremiah. Also, in the Babylonian times, he came and he prophesied with these people. Hey, here's what's going to happen. If you guys don't change your ways, the Babylonians are going to come in and they're going to seize and all these kinds of things. But what happened? Well, the Israelites didn't listen. The Babylonians came in and they overthrew, and Jerusalem was overtaken by the Babylonians. Did Jeremiah, when he found out about it, say, "Ha! This is exactly what I prophesied. You guys are getting what you deserved. I told you this was going to happen, yet you still didn't change your ways." Is that what he did? No, that's not what he did. Actually, Jeremiah, what he's known for, he's known to be called the weeping prophet. He wept over his people. He wept over his people. Jesus in the New Testament, when he looked over the city of Jerusalem, knowing that they were going to reject him, knowing that Rome was going to lay siege to the city of Jerusalem and destroy many of them, it says that he wept for the people. Oh, he said, if you would have only known what could have been yours in this your day. Jesus Christ, the ultimate man of compassion. It says that when he saw the crowds, they were thronging in Galilee, it says that he was moved with compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus was moved with compassion. Now, listen, that phrase, moved with compassion, is a Greek word called splankna, and it literally means, maybe you guys already know this, but it literally means intestine. That's what it means. The idea is Jesus was moved in his intestines. Ancient people equated the deepest emotional part of your being with their guts. That's what they looked at it. We might say today, I love you with all of my heart. Well, back in the day, they would say something like this, I love you with all of my intestines, That's why it says in Colossians in the Old King James Bible to be filled with bowels of tender mercies. The idea is compassion. To have compassion, Jesus felt great compassion toward people. And of course, Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, for they themselves shall obtain mercy. One of the greatest attributes that a Christian can emulate in his or her Savior is to be a person of mercy, of sympathy, of compassion. Not to say something like, well, serves them sinners right. They get what they deserve, or them backsliders right, But Paul puts it this way in Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. He says, brethren, if anyone is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. So I want to ask you very, very clearly this morning, nobody raise their hand or shout out or anything, but is compassion, is mercy one of your attributes? Is that really one of your attributes this morning? Would you be considered a merciful person? When something bad happens to somebody around you, is your knee-jerk reaction to be, how can I help? Or is your knee-jerk reaction, serves them right? So Abram, he moves quickly. That's compassion. He springs into action. Another trait that we see here is courage. Courage. So first of all, compassion. Secondly, courage. Look at verse 14. When Abram heard that his brother, or his nephew, was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan, going way up north. Verse 15, he divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. Listen, we are seeing a whole new side of our friend Abram here. Now, first of all, we know that he is a man of faith. We know that about him. God called him out of the land of Ur, of the Chaldees, and he went to a place that, he didn't know where he was going. He just believed that God was going to lead him there. We know that he's a man of faith. We know that he's a man of peace because he said to Lot, let's not quarrel, let's not fight. You take the best, I'll take whatever's left. And so he's a man of faith. He's a man of peace. But here we see something in Abram that we might not think about him. He is a man that has lion-like courage. He's a man that has lion-like courage. He arms his servants. Let's go to war. Proverbs 28 verse 1 says, the wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. Now notice how many servants Abram has here. How many does he have in the text, in the Bible that's in front of you? How many? 318. Now, 318 staff members, that's a big staff, right? But that's a very small army. 300, especially small against a federation of 4 superpowers. The 4 kings of the East. So these 318 servants, they were brave men. Brave. Verse 15 suggests that they do have a strategy. Here, they decide, let's do something at night when it's dark. Let's divide the troops up for an ambush. And perhaps they actually used those allies that were mentioned in verse 13 of Abram as well that helped in this kind of fight. And they went after him, which, by the way, was courageous here. True compassion begets courage. Compassion begets courage. And here's why. People who know their God, know what their God does, and they are like him. People who know their God, know what their God does, and they act like him. It says in Daniel 11, it says, the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. I love that verse. I mean, think about in the Old Testament, we see this. Gideon with the 300 men, again, at night, they go and they fight the Midianite armies. Hundreds of thousands. And they have this great victory. What a great exploit. Or think about David as well, going to battle against that 9-foot-tall Goliath, defeating him. Again, a great exploit. Or think about Joshua and Caleb saying, let's take the land. Those giants, they are nothing in our hand. We're going to eat them for breakfast. Of course, the rest of the people were afraid, but they knew their God. They knew that they could experience and do great things through him. Now, let me ask you a question this morning. When was the last time others saw courage in your life? When was the last time people saw courage? When was the last time you were moved with compassion in your life? When you were moved to actually look at needy people and say, I am moved with compassion for them, and I'm going to do something actually for them. I'm going to do something for them. It might be the homeless. Maybe it's some teenage kid that's struggling with depression, and maybe they're suicidal, or whatever it might be. You're reaching out. You want to be there for those people. Remember when Jesus said in Matthew 25, he said to his disciples, I was hungry and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked and I was in prison and you came and visited me. And then Jesus says that the people are going to say in that day, when was it, Lord, that we did these things for you? And Jesus' reply is this, inasmuch as you did it to the least of my brethren, you did it unto me. And so here's Abram. He hears about Lot. He goes, I must do something. I must do something. And so he arms his servants, 318 of them, and they go for it. Compassion begets courage. Compassion begets courage. Notice something else from verse 14. He armed, it says, his 318. He armed his 318 servants, which tells us what? He had weapons. He had weapons. Somehow he had weapons enough to get to his 318 servants. And then notice the description of these 318 servants, trained servants. They are trained and they were born in his own house. And so he had weapons to give to his servants. And also notice he happened to train them, or they were trained in the art of warfare, Now, carefully listen to this, folks. Abram was a man of peace. But Abram was a man of wisdom. No doubt he understood, I am a nomad. I'm traveling through this land. I'm a stranger to these people. And the reality of the situation is that I'm probably going to find myself in a situation just like Chapel 14. And he made this decision long ago. Abram would say, I love peace. In fact, I love peace enough to fight for it. I love peace enough to fight for it. And so he did something. He got involved in this war, put himself on the line. He got involved. Jesus says this in John 15:13. He says, greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friends. So here's Abram, man of faith, Mr. Faith, but he is not a pacifist. Not a pacifist. He is a man of war. Francis Schaeffer, the Christian philosopher, once said this. He said, I am not a pacifist because pacifism in a fallen world in which we live means we must desert the very people that deserve our greatest help. And then he gives an example. He says, imagine you're walking down the street and you see a big thug beating up on a helpless little girl. What do you do? What does love mean for you to do at that time, at that moment? Well, you might go over and try to negotiate with the big bully. Excuse me, Mr. Big Mean Bully, but please don't do that. Let's sit down and talk. Well, that's all fine and good, but what if he decides not to do that, what you're asking. He pays no attention to you, but keeps beating her up mercilessly. What does love mean for you to do then? It better mean that you will do anything it takes to stop the thug. Anything. So Abram moves into action. He moves into action. Now, thirdly, look at verse 15. We move now from compassion to courage, now to capability. To capability, thirdly. Verse 15 again. He divided his forces, Abram divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. And so he brought back all the goods, also brought back his brother Lot, or nephew Lot, and his goods, as well as the women and the people. So here's a guy with strategy, with teamwork, with persistence, chases these guys down. These armies, he chases them 150 miles north from where he's at. He doesn't say, I'm just going to scare them straight and that'll be the end of it. I'm done. No, he went for it until the job was completed. This is capability. He has capability here. He kept at it, he went for it, and he finished the task. He finished the task. Think about those three qualities. Those three qualities, think about them in your own walk as a believer, in your own Christian life. Teamwork. Are you part of the greater church? Are you involved? Strategy. Do you have a plan for how to grow in your walk with the Lord? And then thirdly, persistence. Teamwork, strategy, persistence. See, so often, we come to church and perhaps something in the message moves you. Maybe I should be doing this, I should do this, and maybe you come and you say, I want to be involved with these things. Whenever you're moved to do something in the will of God and you go for it, you may not experience instant success. That's just the fact of the matter. You might have to work at it for a couple of days. Or a couple of weeks, or a couple of months, or a few years, right? Somebody once said, by persistence, the sloth reached the ark. Think on that. I mean, picture that in your mind for a moment. That crazy picture of all of the animals coming into the ark. You're seeing the giraffe with their big long strides coming, the elephants also with their big long strides, or even a horse with their quicker, they're moving swiftly, But the sloth, it takes time. It takes time. In church history, Martin Luther famously posted 95 problems that he had with the Catholic Church. Nailed it right on the Wittenberg door in Germany. Here's all the things that I have an issue with. Well, the church didn't change the next day. It took many, many years, actually, and actually the Lutheran Church sprung out of that. Or in history, think about Thomas Edison. It's said that one of his assistants was discouraged one day, and they said, we've tried so many things and we have failed. They were trying to make the light bulb, of course. And Edison said, we didn't fail. We just discovered 700 things that didn't work. And so here's Abram with 318 trained servants chasing 4 superpowers 150 miles until when? Until the job is done. Abram's compassion prompted his courage, which led to his capability. And he won. And he went for it. And he completed what God put out in front of him. In the 1940s, famously, Winston Churchill gave this famous speech to his alma mater, his school. And this was the time of Great Britain when it was in World War II. And according to Churchill, when the war began, well, their nation was not ready for this war, but they became more prepared as the war went on. So to his school, but even more to his nation, he said these words famously. He said, never give in, never, 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 in nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in except to the convictions of honor and good sense never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. Never give in. Listen, if your compassion moves you to activity, then hang in there until you gain the victory. Until you get the victory through God. And that's what Abram did. Those three qualities are the kind of qualities that you want in a friend when you're going through a crisis. These are compassion, courage, and capability. And then our fourth is conviction. Fourthly is conviction. Look at verse 17. It says, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And so apparently during the battle, when these four kings came through, there were some kings that got away. This is one of the kings that got away and escapes and then comes back and seems to be in the spot of Sodom when Abram comes back from winning. And so after Abram's return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer, and the kings were with him. Verse 18. Just a little bit of a side note here. A wonderful side note. Verse 18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he, Abram, gave him, Melchizedek, a tithe of all. Now, we are going to get back to Melchizedek in a minute here. But look, if you would, verse 21. It says, Now the king of Sodom, this is the guy from verse 17, said to Abram, Give me the persons, the ones that were all taken captive when the kings came through, but you take the goods for yourself. But Abram, notice, said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who were with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. And so apparently the allies of Abram did not take the same oath that Abram had taken about not taking of the spoils. So the scene is this. Sodom's king named Bara comes out. Abram's coming back after winning this battle against the four kings in this battle. And the king of Sodom, offers Abram this handsome reward for compensation for the fact that Abram was moved with compassion and courage and capability and defeated those kings. But Abram says, no, I'm not going to take any of this. I refuse it. Well, why? Well, according to Abram, he's already sworn an oath to God before the battle. Look at verse 22. It says, I have raised my hand to the Lord, indicating that sometime before he went out to battle, he promised God beforehand, now, I'm not going to take of anything that these people possess. Now, probably he says something kind of like this to God before he went out to battle. God, please give me the victory, and you're going to get the glory. Give me the victory, and I'm not going to take anything for myself. Just help me to get my nephew Lot back. No money, no clothes, no gold, no servants. Been there, done that with Pharaoh in Egypt. I'm not going to go there again. I'm going to give you the glory. You're the one that gets the glory here. Now, why did he make that promise? Why? Well, simply because if he hadn't made that promise, if he had taken the money from that guy, people would say, oh, we know why Abram did this thing. Sure, he's courageous. Sure, he's done these things and he has great capability, but he did it for the money. This guy's a warmongerer. He does it for the money, and it would really diminish the glory of God. And so Abram refuses that. Now, folks, this morning, here what we're dealing with is the slippery slopes of motives. The slippery slope, like, why do you do what you do? Why would you ever get involved in ministry? Is it for the fame? Is it for the notoriety? Is it for to be noticed around? Is it for the money? Or do you say, I am just doing this purely for the glory of God. That's what I want to do here. Abram did it to rescue Lot and to give God the glory. So again, this is where conviction comes in. This is where conviction comes in. Abram, again, said something to God beforehand, and now he does what he said he was going to do. And so, do you know what conviction means? Do you know what it means? It means keeping your promise. It means doing what you said that you would do. That's what it means. Ted Engstrom wrote a book on integrity, and he said he looked around the Christian community, and according to him, many Christians have, and I'm going to say a strong word here, they have AIDS. Or, he says they have acquired integrity deficiency syndrome. They say certain things and they make certain promises, but they do not keep their promises. They have AIDS, acquired integrity deficiency syndrome. Every time a husband, every time a wife leaves their spouse, every time a pastor gets involved in a scandal involving sexual immorality or maybe stealing money from the church, every time a Christian businessman cheats on their taxes, anytime hypocrisy is exposed, there is a deficiency in integrity, in conviction. Abram, he made a promise to God. He kept his promise. He had conviction. He did not take the money. He wouldn't take the money. He has conviction. One final attribute here this morning, and it is constraint. Constraint. Look back, if you would, to verse 18. Verse 18. Now listen, we really could spend all day here. And it would take us to all different parts of the Bible, many different parts of the Bible. But here is the fifth quality of a godly person in times of crisis: constraint or humility. It says this: Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he, Abram, gave him, Melchizedek, a tithe of all. Let me just say that Melchizedek is one of the most mysterious dudes in all the Bible. He is. And yet, fascinatingly, we want to ask the question, who is he? Who is this guy? Well, opinions really vary on who Melchizedek is. Some say that he's Shem, Noah's son. He's just lived for a really long time, and he's still alive today. Well, in this particular story. Some believe that he's just a monotheistic Gentile king who's kind of come out of nowhere. That's who he is. Now, many people believe that this is actually Jesus Christ in pre-incarnate form. Like, many people call it a Christophany here. Now, I'll give you a couple of hints on who I think this character is. First of all, his name is Melchizedek. Melchizedek, which means what? King of righteousness. King of righteousness. It says that he comes from a city named Salem, which means what? Peace. Which actually, Salem actually becomes what city? Jerusalem. We see that he's a priest. So he's a king and he's a priest. And then he also comes out with these two very familiar elements: bread and wine. He comes out of nowhere. He is then the only one that Abram actually recognizes as his superior here, because Abram, it says, receives a blessing from him, and then Abram then pays a tithe to him. Interesting, folks, that tithing was and is even to this day considered an act of submission and worship to God. So, why did he do that? Well, look at verse 20. He, Melchizedek, says, Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Now, here, just as Abram refused to take the spoils from the king of Sodom, now he gives money to Melchizedek, acknowledging, thanking God for giving him the victory in the battle. That's right. God gave me the victory. He's the one that did this. I recognize that as well. He gave him a tenth, a tithe, a worship of all that he had. I don't know. You do the math this morning here. So here is genuine constraint, recognizing, well, it actually wasn't my strategy here. He could have said, I am so strategic. Look at what I have done here. 318 guys. We beat 4 kings. I am so smart. No, he doesn't take credit for it. He promises God that God's going to get the glory, and now he's giving a tithe of all of his possessions. He's thanking God for the victory. The point is this, folks, this morning, no matter how gifted, how talented, how successful you are in ministry or business or sports or whatever it might be, thank God a lot for what he has done in your life, for the success that he's given to you. And you might be saying, oh, Aaron, you do not get it. I am so talented. God's just lucky to have me here, right? It's a very lucky God that he is. No, the truth of the matter is the Bible says, God chooses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. That's what the Bible says. I'm actually reminded of that often when people come up and say something like, oh, Aaron, God is using you in this church to do a work. And you know what the translation of that is? Aaron, God is actually using you, even though you are so foolish. And that's really true. And actually, when I get here early on Sunday mornings especially, I often hear Mr. T across the street, which is a gigantic donkey, white donkey, hee-hawn. And it always reminds me of the story in the Old Testament of Balaam. Balaam was riding a donkey to put a curse on the Israelites, and the donkey starts talking to him and telling him not to do what he was doing. And it always reminds me, God can use a donkey, he can use me as well. And that is just the reality. That is just the reality of it. Abram recognized that I got 318 men and we won the battle. God be glorified. God's to be glorified. And so compassion, courage, capability, conviction, and now true constraint. 5 great qualities that you want in a friend, your friend, a friend that you have when you're going through crisis in your life. 5 great qualities that you need to have when friends of yours or people around you are going through crisis as well. So often people will say something like, well, that's all fine and dandy, nice little cute little message you got here this morning, Aaron. But why should I actually get involved in people's lives? They are so messy, filled with drama. Why do I want to be taken into people's lives? Why would I do something like that? Well, again, people who know their God know what their God does, and they act like their God. People who know their God know what their God does, and they act like their God. Imagine if Jesus Christ in heaven would have said, you know what, this is kind of a good idea for me to go down there, but I just don't want to deal with the drama. I don't want to come out of heaven. I've got a nice, cushy spot right here next to the Father. I'm fine. I'm not going to go down there. No, wonderfully, Jesus didn't say that, right? He came out of heaven, he clothed himself in humanity, and he dealt with our mess. He dealt with our sin. It says this, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Christ died for us. And so, folks, there's always going to be a crisis. There's always going to be issues around you. There's always going to be maybe drama in people's lives around you. Even today, I might have some of you come up and have some issues, some drama, some crises in your life, and I do not mind. That's what God's called me to be here for. There's always a crisis in somebody's life, in somebody's community, around you. We need people who will get involved with people around you. Don't just say, hey, That's somebody else's problem. Kind of serves them right. They dug their own hole. No, we're to be believers. We're to be people that actually act like Jesus in the community around us. Amen? Let's pray.